Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. In George Orwell's novel, 1984, the job of the Ministry of Truth was to rewrite the past to suit the needs of current politicians. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. One of the primary jobs of government climate scientists has been to erase past climate episodes which were inconvenient for global warming theory. In this video, I discuss how they've tried to erase the 1970s global cooling scare. After a long period of warming, Earth cooled sharply from the 1940s to 1970s. This wrecked global warming theory, so climate scientists had to get rid of it. So starting a few years ago, we started seeing lots of effort from scientists to make the 1940s to 1970s global cooling disappear. They claim that the 1940s to 1970s global cooling never occurred and there was never any scientific consensus. This is in direct contradiction to what the New York Times reported in 1961. Scientists agree world is colder. An assembly of specialists from several continents seems to have reached unanimous agreement. It is getting colder. Unanimous agreement sounds pretty much like a consensus to me. In 1970, the New York Times reported, U.S. and Soviet pressed studies of a colder Arctic. The United States and the Soviet Union are mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate is becoming more frigid and why parts of Arctic sea ice have recently become ominously thicker and whether the extent of that ice cover contributes to the onset of ice ages. Ominously thickening ice sounds a lot like global cooling to me. In 1975, the National Academy of Sciences generated this graph. It showed the cooling from 1940 to 1970. In 1975, the National Center for Atmospheric Research generated a very similar graph, showed warming from 1880 to 1940 and a sharp cooling to 1970, in which all of the prior warming was lost. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said at the time that the global cooling was indisputable. Dr. J. Murray Mitchell of NOAA said, on the average, it's cooled down by something like 1 degree Fahrenheit or half a degree Celsius, and that cooling began around World War II. Everyone agreed that the 1940 to 1970s global cooling was real. I remember it very well from my childhood. It was reported that glaciers were growing in Norway for the first time in 200 years. Glaciers had been melting for 200 years, and suddenly they started growing again. That sounds a lot like global cooling to me. And in 1978, the New York Times reported, International team of specialists finds no end in sight to the 30-year cooling trend. The CIA was very worried about global cooling at the time. In a 1974 report, they said, there is moreover growing consensus among leading climatologists that the world is undergoing a cooling trend. In that report, they said climatic changes would bring global unrest. Major climatic changes will bring about global unrest of a proportion almost beyond comprehension, heightening the risk of international conflict, according to a Central Intelligence Agency report released today. This 1940 to 1970s global cooling was extremely inconvenient and pretty much wrecked global warming theory. So quite predictably, government agencies have erased it. The graph on the left is the 1974 global temperature graph from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. That's the official government climate lab. It showed warming from 1880 to 1940 and a sharp cooling from 1940 to 1970. But the graph on the right is the current equivalent temperature graph from NASA. Notice that the 1940 to 1970 global cooling is gone. In fact, they show a slight warming during that period. This didn't happen by accident. ClimateGate emails show that government climate scientists discussed how to get rid of the 1940s blip and thus the subsequent cooling. from Tom Wigley to Phil Jones, subject 1940s. So if we could reduce the ocean blip by, say, 0.15 degrees Celsius, then this would be significant for the global mean, but we would still have to explain the land blip. It would be good to remove at least part of the 1940s blip, but we're still left with why the blip. Government climate scientists made the decision to get rid of the 1940s blip and subsequent cooling without any scientific basis. This is straight out of Orwell's 1984. This is the Ministry of Truth rewriting history to suit the political needs of the current regime. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.